So it's very interesting to see how Capcom is handling the Nintendo Switch 2 versus the Nintendo Switch 1. My good friend Stealth over on Twitter posted something, and I thought that it was very interesting considering what we got with the Nintendo Switch 1 and the relationship that the fans had when it came to what Capcom was doing on the Switch 1 and the announcements compared to the Nintendo Switch 2. It's almost like a night and day difference. It is a huge and massive thing that we have to talk about overall, but I do think that it's going to prep and kind of get things ready and primed up for what's going to be happening with the Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan, because Nintendo Switch 2 actually broke a 20-plus-year-old record there, which I touched on before in the past, but I wanted to kind of delve into it a bit more and see what can happen after that. We also got to talk about Unreal Engine 5, and you guys know, or maybe some of you guys know, the issues with that. Expedition 33, that potential coming over to the Switch 2. So there's a lot to get into right now at this point. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the Capcom situation, because Stealth over on Twitter posted this, and I found this to be pretty cool overall, but just interesting to talk about the dynamics between back in 2017 and down here in 2025. So Capcom Switch 2 announcements within the first 6 months. Street Fighter 6, Kinitsugami, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8 or Village, Resident Evil Requiem, Monster Hunter Stories 3, Pragmata, and Mega Man Dual Override. That is 8 titles within the first 6 months per when the system came out. Obviously, one game overall since the system has come out, and that is pretty good. This is a huge improvement, a massive upgrade over what we got with the Nintendo Switch 1, where Capcom was essentially tiptoeing around, just like many other third-party developers. There was really only one third-party developer that truly believed in the Nintendo Switch 2 from the beginning and decided to put their engines and their support and put titles on there, and that was Koei Tecmo. That was pretty much the only company that was putting some stuff out on the system and believed in it beforehand and talked about that and make sure that they had stuff ready to go. A lot of other third-party developers just did not believe in the Nintendo Switch 1. Heck, even the Pokemon company, a company that works hand in hand with Nintendo, did not believe in the Nintendo Switch 1 overall. It was really crazy to look back at it now that the Nintendo Switch 1 might probably be, or possibly be, the best-selling system of all time, and even if it doesn't get to that point, the second best-selling system of all time, and the first system to break the 150 million unit mark since the Nintendo DS back like 20 years ago or something like that. It's full 20 years ago since the DS came out plus. So it's crazy just to think about that, how many people did not have that much confidence in the platform, but it ultimately ended up paying off as many developers scrambled and rushed to get their games out on there. Now with the Nintendo Switch 2, you're seeing a complete 180 with how a lot of these developers are handling things. Capcom here has been very impressive. I love to see that. One, Street Fighter, one of their biggest brands, got a movie coming out and all of that next year in 2026. To me, that was very important, and it was upsetting not seeing something like Street Fighter 5, even though launched kind of rough, but not seeing Street Fighter 5 on the Nintendo Switch 1 definitely kind of was but you know, Sony had that deal and all that. I don't think it ever came over to Xbox either. The thing about it is that getting something like Street Fighter 6, getting Kinitsugami, getting kind of the AA, getting the big AAA stuff, Resident Evil 7, 8, and 9 is massive for the Nintendo Switch 2. To have those type of games on the platform this early within a year of the system's life, but in, I would just say, the biggest one, obviously, Resident Evil Requiem, day and date, and apparently running pretty good. Obviously, not to the level of PlayStation 5 Pro or PC high-end, but still a acceptable and good level overall, and you can play that anywhere that you want. That is huge, and I know that, yes, Nintendo first-party games, those are the big things, those are the system movers, those are the system drivers, but man, I cannot tell you how important it is to have a game like Resident Evil Village there day and date with other platforms. That is huge, and definitely got Sony thinking a little bit, because once again, I've talked about this before in the past, Sony had a monopoly in Japan when it came to AAA third-party games day one, because Xbox platform is just not relevant there. Nintendo would never get those big AAA games day one on the Switch 1, or even at all, so essentially all that revenue would go to Sony. Now that is changing right here with Capcom. Now some of that revenue, or a lot of that revenue, is going to go to Nintendo with Resident Evil Requiem day and date with PlayStation 5. So that is huge. That is massive in the, I would say, landscape of the AAA scope in Japan overall. Now, we'll see how it kind of works out in other places, but for me, I like to see the competition, and that's why I was really happy that the Nintendo Switch 2 has come out at this point, and it can run a lot of these games. Something like Pragmata, for example. Once again, that's been a heavily anticipated game in Japan overall, and more people are excited for it, but that's also coming to Switch 2 day one in April next year in 2026. So for Capcom, at least at this point, this is very exciting. I bet that they're really thrilled that they're able to bring these games over. The RE engine is doing wonders on the Nintendo Switch 2, which makes sense because if you look at the games, they're running stuff like Resident Evil 4 Remake and Monster Hunter World and all sorts of stuff on the RE engine, and it looked great and it played great on the PS4 and the Xbox One. Not perfect, not as good as it does on PS5 and Xbox Series, but still really good. And even on the Xbox Series S, RE engine games run good on there too. So yeah, I would expect the RE engine to do great things on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that is proving to be right now at this point. Now for Capcom, I think that the biggest thing is just keeping the momentum up and getting these games sold very well. I think that if you look at Resident Evil Requiem, I think the marketing has been pretty good at this point. They just announced Leon is going to be in there. I love the reveal trailer and all that, so just got to keep that up. Monster Hunter Stories 3, that's going to be another big one. A lot of good stuff coming up from Capcom. So what do you guys think about this blitz of Capcom announcements at the beginning of the Nintendo Switch 2's life? And what do you think for the future as well? What would you like to see from Capcom? Let me know in the comment section below. But before we get to the next topic, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my videos as soon as they drop. Okay, we've got to talk about what happened in Japan the other week, because the Nintendo Switch 2 was actually a little bit behind the GBA and the PS2 in terms of fastest selling systems of all time in Japan. But with the massive week that it had the previous week, not last week, we're going to get those numbers coming up, but the week before, where the Nintendo Switch 2 sold 203,000 units plus, it actually leapfrogged the GBA and the PS2 to become the fastest selling system of all time in Japan. It kind of caught up to it. It was already at a really good pace and blowing away the Nintendo Switch 1, but now at this point it's solidified itself. And if it can continue to have stock, which we did get some reports from Genki and people in Japan that there are starting to see regular stock for the Nintendo Switch 2, more stock for the Nintendo Switch 2, still have to line up sometimes in some stores, but it's coming there. I think that this can really build a lead overall in Japan. Now check this out as well, guys. This is more than double the Switch 1 had in the same time frame, which is just crazy to see overall. The Nintendo Switch 1 was an interesting system because it didn't launch to some crazy type of numbers overall in terms of historic numbers. Didn't launch to that. Nintendo was not sure about this system overall, so they did have an okay amount, but they blew through a lot of that stock. But if you look at it in comparison to the Switch 2 stock, I mean, it was nowhere near the same. So Nintendo, throughout the first 6 months to a year, they were just trying to get caught up on the stock, even having to airlift systems, which is significantly more expensive than this shipping them by sea and all that. So the fact that Switch 2 is able to double up the Switch 1 at this point and getting considerably more games overall, this is definitely a good sign when it comes to Switch 2 and kind of what it's doing. Now, if you look at the systems that it's beat out here, I mean, look at how old these systems are. The GBA, yeah, that came out in like what, 2000, 2001? The PlayStation 2, that came out in 2000. These systems are old at this point. They are very old at this point. So to see the stagnation a little bit in terms of the rate of sales over the last 20 years plus, it shows that the Nintendo Switch 2 is something special to get the Japanese public this excited about a platform, especially if you look at the amount of people that are in Japan compared to some of the other regions that are the biggest regions out there, like the US or Europe, and the fact that they've been able to sell this many systems, that is a high interest level. Pretty much essentially, I want to say monopoly on that market, because of course there's mobile and there's PC and there's other stuff, and PlayStation still has something there, but this is definitely some of the highest mindshare that they've had, obviously, at the beginning of a system launch in a very long time. Because even when the Nintendo Switch 1 launched, there was still the PlayStation 4, there was still the 3DS that was kind of getting a lot of attention there, and 3DS did really good in Japan as well. But I do think that now at this point, Switch 2, with what it's done here, passing up the GBA, passing up the PS2 in terms of fastest selling in the first 6 months or so, I think that it's going to continue to kind of snowball at this point, especially as we get Capcom and other third-party developers putting out their games on the platform, and if Nintendo can really capitalize on next year, which I think is going to be so crucial. People don't talk about that as much. It is about the marathon. It's not about necessarily the short term. It's about the long term and what games you have. So 2026 and the games layout there, that's going to be so important going into the second calendar year of the Nintendo Switch 2. So we'll see what happens on that front as well. So what do you guys think about this when it comes to Switch 2? Fastest selling system, Japan, and what's going on there, beating out the GBA and the PS2. Let me know in the comment section below. But let's get into another thing here, and we're going to talk about Expedition 33 and Unreal Engine 5 and what's happening there. So I want to talk about first just Unreal Engine 5. Shout outs to my man Reese Kiwi Talks Riley. He discussed this and what's happening with the Nintendo Switch 2 and this platform, and then we can talk about Expedition 33, some of my thoughts on that, because I realized I didn't give you guys like a post game review or anything like that. I just talked about how I like the game. So we'll talk about that and what's happening with it. So Reese said on Twitter, due to third-party announcements on Switch 2, you'll see that the RE engine, Creation engine, id Tech engine, etc. are working on Switch 2, no problem. Well, maybe not Creation engine, but everyone knows how Bethesda rolls. A number of devs have had problems with Unreal Engine 5 games running on Switch 2, which is why you haven't seen an announcement for games like Expedition 33, Halo, Metal Gear Solid yet, etc. It requires more work than initially thought. Now, this is something that I talked about on Twitter. I was like, yeah, you know what? I can understand that, because if you look at Unreal Engine 4, that was supported on the Nintendo Switch 1, but there was a number of issues with Unreal Engine 4 games and also with Unity as well. Some Unity games were kind of crusty on the Switch 1, but Unreal Engine 4 had some issues. It had so many issues to the point to where Square Enix actually had to delay the Switch 1 version of Dragon Quest XI, and they actually just made it its own version of the game. They didn't port the PS4 version, which was Unreal Engine 4. They were having too many issues in there, waiting for updates from Unreal, so they decided to essentially make its own version of the game with Dragon Quest XI-S, Echoes of an Elusive Age Definitive Edition, and when they made that version for it, it wasn't a port. So while it didn't look as good, they were able to make a number of enhancements to the game, and then that version of the game was ported over to Xbox Series and PlayStation 5, so it looked a little bit worse than how the game looked on the PlayStation 4 because they used the Switch code of that game. And we saw other Unreal Engine 4 games have issues like Rime and other stuff, so there was definitely issues with Unreal Engine 4 on the Nintendo Switch 1, even though there really shouldn't have been. And then now with Unreal Engine 5, there's issues with this engine on Xbox Series and on PlayStation 5. So of course with this new platform, there's definitely going to be some issues there. Metal Gear has had some issues overall. Expedition 33, depending on what platform you're playing on it, can have some issues here and there. Then Halo, we saw some of the problems that Halo has when it comes to that first trailer. And of course, I think it's going to get all smoothed out in these games. They're not like the worst ever, but Metal Gear Solid in particular on Unreal Engine 5 definitely has some major issues even on PS5 Pro with the frame rate and stuff. So yeah, I can understand how they're having some issues there when it comes down to that. But let's discuss one of the most high profile games that everyone is talking about when it comes to the Game Awards and what happened there, and that's Clair Obscur Expedition 33. And I find it interesting that some people think that I did not like the fact that Clair Obscur Expedition 33 won so many awards or did great. Well, I want to let you guys know I'm a big fan of Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I've actually 100% beat the game. I put 90 plus hours into it. You are seeing my actual PSN and my game progress and the hours that I played and my trophies. Didn't platinum it because I didn't feel like platinum it, but I essentially did everything that you can do in the game. I'm missing like a trophy or two or a couple different trophies, but I beat the final mysterious crazy boss in the game. I did that, and then I haven't done the free thank you DLC that they dropped at the Game Awards. I haven't done that, but I pretty much did everything that you can do in the game up until this point. So for me at least, when it comes down to this game, I love the game. Now, the game won like 10 awards or 9 awards or however many awards it won, and that's great. Now, do I think that it should have won every single category it was pretty much in, outside of, I think, one like sound design or audio design? I mean, I'm not so sure about that. I think that there was some other stuff that maybe other games could have won, but at the end of the day, like, I still think that it deserves a lot of its awards, and Game of the Year, that's fine. I put pretty much time into almost every single Game of the Year game this year, at least from the Game Awards. I put time into Donkey Kong Bonanza. I beat that game. I thought it was great. I put a ton of time into Clair Obscur on my PS5. So for me, at least, I think that Clair Obscur is an incredible game. I think it does a lot of stuff right. I think that it's not perfect, but at the same time, most games aren't, except for Chrono Trigger. That's the only perfect game ever, and maybe Mario Bros. 3. But outside of that, man, like, there's not a lot of stuff that it could do, like, significantly better in terms of what they're trying to do. They told a great story. I think that the gameplay is very good. I like the pairing mechanic in there, and the overall message of the game once you beat it is really, really thought-provoking, and I think that they have the start of something that could get even better. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they're doing next. But yeah, people trying to accuse me and trying to say that, oh, well, I was upset or angry. Not really. I played the game. I love it. I think it's really good and it's worth it. And you know what? After I'm done with Metroid Prime 4 and I really take a look at what my favorite games of 2025 are, this game might be my game of the year too. But right now it's battling with a couple other games here, and I'll have my list of top 25 games coming up pretty soon here, or top games overall, my game of the year. But yeah, it's one of those things where I'm not upset at all. I think that the developers did an incredible job when it comes to this game, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next from them when it comes to the next game in the Clair Obscur or Expedition franchise, or whatever they're going to call it next. So what do you guys think about everything that we discussed here? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.